Hey everybody, this is Duke with an instructional video on how to build your FPV quadcopter in the UAS 2350 class. So I have this video as a reference for you guys to follow along and do some of the electronics in the build. So Ryan Rogers, who designed the frame that we're using, he has a video on how to build the actual frame and how to put the frame pieces together. And this video is meant to help you with electronics since that's not covered in his video, and we have specific electronics this semester we're using. So I'm going to try to be brief. I don't want the video to be too long, but give you pointers on all the different parts and components we're going to be adding this semester. So first I'm going to take this flight controller actually off the frame. The first thing you want to note is when you're completing the construction of the frame, there are some different mounting holes. There we go. Try to show the different mounting holes here. So we have a number of holes in kind of a X orientation here that are meant for flight controllers or ESCs that are square and with kind of a flat front, if that makes sense. So if it were to be more like this, mounted this way. And then we have one set of screw holes that's a 25 by 25 millimeter direction. That's where the screws are actually installed in right now. And that's what we'll be using this semester. So when you assemble the frame with Ryan's video, make sure you install the screws into the 25 by 25 millimeter holes on the frame, not the other ones that are available. It'll be the only set that's basically set up in kind of a diagonal fashion so that the board sits in like a diamond shape rather than a square. Okay. And I realized in putting some of this together that the screws in the SpeedyB kit, the ones that come with your flight controller, are not quite long enough for our entire build. So they'll fit the flight controller, but they won't fit our video transmitter. And that's okay. You can always grab some more screws from the lab that are a little bit longer while you're doing the build, but for general assembly, we're going to have to assemble this, do some soldering and stuff, and all of the measurements that we're taking on how long the wires need to be and such will be just fine. And then later when we take the quad apart to waterproof and coat the components, then we can put it back together with longer screws, and that shouldn't be a problem. So we also will use Loctite on the screws the second time around when we put it together. You don't need to use Loctite the first time around because you got to take it all apart anyways. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pause this video here for a second so you can jump over to Ryan's video and assemble the frame. So we have these screws assembled to then mount other components on so we can start doing some soldering. So go ahead and jump over to Ryan's video now and then come on back here and we'll finish up. Okay, so what we're going to do with this is going to run through the electronics that you'll need to install on the quad in order for it to function. I have kind of a demo build here. I'm not going to actually build the quad in this video. I need to use these parts for other students as well, so I can't solder them up and stuff right now. But I can show you kind of where things go and give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on with the build itself. I also encourage you to reference the instructions in the SpeedyB kit, and which I'll show you in the video, as well as the instructions in your video transmitter bag as well. Okay, so here, let me zoom in a little bit. We have our quad frame, the bottom plate with these screws installed. Okay, got some nuts on those screws. It's very hard to see that kind of stuff with the camera, but install the screws so the screws aren't going anywhere. They're just hand tight right now. That's all we really need to keep things stationary for soldering. We're going to take our flight controller all-in-one, flight controller ESC all-in-one board out of the box from the SpeedyB box. We're going to install it on those screws like we would if we're doing our build, which would be in this fashion. This is the front of the aircraft towards the top of the screen. Okay, and you notice I have the capacitor installed already. The capacitor comes in the SpeedyB kit. There's a little bag of accessories and stuff like that. It's in one of those, as is the XT30 pigtail that comes pre-assembled on one side. Okay, so we're going to talk about the power for the drone first, and then we'll go on to other components. I have here a 3D printed piece that's part of your kit. Yours may be a different color, but there's a piece that looks like this. Okay, and this is your XT30 holder. What it's designed to do here is thread your XT30 pigtail through and then install the connector into the plastic. Now I'm not going to push mine in all the way because I want to be able to get it back out easily, but it's meant to be seated all the way through there. This piece will then be later attached to your drone in the back here, and it will hold this connector for you so you can just plug a battery in and then go fly. You don't have to try to zip tie the connector to something or keep it out of the way of the propellers. It's kind of contained right there, which I think is a really nice design. But we'll see my capacitor here. It's a relatively large capacitor because this ESC is rated for 6S, up to a 6S battery. And so it's relatively big. We got to kind of keep it out of the way of the props. And so you'll see these pads in the back here. We have these large pads labeled positive and negative. Okay. And those pads are where the battery connects and where the capacitor needs to be mounted as well. So if we take the flight controller off, you'll see I've actually taken the capacitor, run it up through the bottom of the pads, okay, with some little insulation that comes with the capacitor to keep those insulated, and kind of bent it at a specific angle so that the capacitor comes back straight even though the board's at a 45-degree angle. Okay, we can't go straight out from the pads because, again, the capacitor will stick out way over here, and that will be too close to the motor and the propeller that's spinning. It'll be in the way. So you can mount the capacitor on the bottom like I did. You can put it on the top. However you want to do it, you really just need to get this mounted and insulated. So don't forget that heat shrink if you have a long part of the capacitor sticking out. And what I would then do is I would attach the capacitor with a little bit of solder to the pads, and then it's good to go. I just need to trim off the excess of the legs here. This silver part that's hanging off, that's extra. You'd trim that off, okay? And the capacitor would be attached. I can then take my battery lead and figure out how I want to route that. Let's move these motor wires out of the way. Maybe I want to come around and go around on the top or something, like so. Or maybe I want to come around this side and kind of lay it around the capacitor. I said you can do it a number of ways. You just want to make sure your power wires are attached in the positive and negative direction correctly. And of course, we don't have stuff out here on the arms by the props. You can also trim this. You don't have to use this length. You can trim this just like you trim the capacitor to length to fit our frame. So if you want it a little bit shorter, that's fine. Okay. But here we can see the capacitor. There is a side that is negative. You can see this marking as a negative sign. And also, it's hard to see once the legs are bent, but there's a shorter leg, and the shorter leg of the two legs is the negative leg. The longer one is the positive. So you can tell which way it is there. Don't solder it on backwards. It'll be a huge pain, and it will get damaged if you plug it in like that. Okay. But this is one way you could do it. You could put the capacitor on the bottom like that. It'll make it easy to put the capacitor down here and kind of zip tie it around this part of the frame so it's not moving and it's not getting anywhere it shouldn't, like into the prop. Okay. The props are very tight though, so don't let it hang out too far over here into this area here or onto the arm or anything. You might be able to bend the capacitor up a different way, but you do need to fit the capacitor and the power connectors both onto those pads. Okay. So what do you want to do on bottom, top, whatever, however you want to mount that. You can of course fiddle around with a few different mounting methods. That's kind of why we do all this dry fit type stuff before we start soldering to make sure it's going to work and work how we want it to. You can install the capacitor on the top as well. I just wanted to show you that. Okay. And that can be done that way. You kind of bend it back again the same way or however you want to do that. Okay. So capacitor and power connector there. That should get you going on that. I'll take this out for the rest of the demonstration here so we can see a little bit better. All right. Next up are our motors. Okay, so you can see this motor's mounted here with one of these little yellow bumper skid pieces. I just have one screw in it to hold it in temporarily. Okay, when you get your motors, they'll come with a bunch of screws, like 5 bags of different sizes of screws. Okay, there'll be two sets of bags that are noticeably longer. We're not going to use those right now. And there are 3 sets of screws that are look similar in size, though they're not exactly the same. And these are actually different lengths. So if you sort them according to length, the screws we're going to end up using are going to be the ones that are the middle length. Okay, and the reason for that is because they're the right length to go up through the bumper, through the arm, and into the motor without going too far into the motor and damaging the copper coils, okay, on the bottom of the motor there, or damaging the wires that come from the motor. Okay, so remember there's 5 bags total of screws. Find the 3 ones that are smaller overall, and then sort those according to size. You use the middle size. Okay, I haven't actually measured those. I don't know how long they are, but you can measure them if you'd like. Too small, too big, just right. Okay, so use those. You use those on each motor, and you want to put at least a couple of screws in there probably to hold the motors in place while you start to do the next step, which is Let's zoom out a little bit. Measuring the motor wires. Okay, so each motor has 3 wires. Doesn't matter what order they're attached to the flight controller all-in-one board in. Okay, most people just do them straight across. They're not going to like twist them or anything like that. I just do them flat. Okay, so we'll take them flat across here, and we have 1, 2, 3 pads there, 1, 2, 3 here, 1, 2, 3 there, and 1, 2, 3 there. Those are for the motors. So bring them across. You're going to have to cut these down. They're too long to start with. You don't want them to be hanging off all over the place. They'll just get cut up by the propellers. We also don't want them to be taut or too tight. Okay, so give ourselves a little slack. We're going to want to zip tie these down to the arm probably. So you want a little bit of slack going up towards the flight controller all-in-one board. Maybe something like that would be a good length to then cut, tin the wires, and solder them onto your all-in-one board. And you throw a zip tie around here, and that'll hold the wires down. They have a little bit of slack here so they're not pulling and going to break and crash if they're too tight. Okay, so each motor will do that 4 times, of course, 1 for each motor. And that should get you your motors attached and cut to length. Okay. All right, next up we have a few of the items that are more on the flight controller side. The power that we did in the motor wiring is more on the ESC side. And now we're going to do some more on the flight controller side, even though it's all one board here. Okay. So I have here my instructions for my JEP RC RAD VTX, and then the flight controller as well. So these are really helpful to reference. We're looking at these a little bit in this video. Okay. So here we have the page with the flight controller, and we have a couple peripheral devices. 2 of these we're going to be installing ourselves. We have our receiver down here, and we have our video transmitter up here. Oh, and sorry, a camera. So 3 of these are all here. And so these help you understand where the wires should go on the flight controller to allow you to wire things up correctly. So if we take our receiver, this is an example receiver I have here. It's a little guy. This is the kind that I would recommend using if you haven't bought one yet. Buy one today. You'll need it soon. But it has a little tower antenna, so it fits really well in the small build. External antennas aren't really needed for these small builds. We don't fly them very far away. And you have plenty of range. So here's our little receiver. Okay. And on most receivers, it'll have some kind of silk screen, which is the lettering on the back. This is really hard to see. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit by getting my hand closer. Where are we at? There we go. Okay. So you can kind of see there on the back, there's an R on the right-hand side. There's a T. And then we have a, man, that is hard to see. We have a positive. Oops, sorry. R and then T and then positive and negative, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Make sure you check the pinout on yours. Okay, it could be different than that. They're not all the same order. We have a R, T, power, and ground. And so when we look at those 4 pads there, we look back at our flight controller diagram here, we see that our receiver, Express LRS receiver, which is what all of you are using, ground, power, T and R, TX and RX. And if we follow these along here over to the board, we can see power and ground go to power and ground. There's 2 pads here on the lower level. And then we have, they suggest T6 and R6, which are these pads up here on the upper level. Okay. And you see that the RX pad on the receiver goes to the TX pad on the flight controller. That's not a typo. RX goes to TX and TX goes to RX over here. So those kind of crisscross. Power and ground go straight across. Power to power, ground to ground. Okay. So in the terms of our physical build, zoom out a little bit here. Our physical build is going to be set up with the flight controller again like this. That's the front of the copter. Okay. And your receiver, you can kind of tuck it back in here on the other side from the capacitor. You could probably tuck it in up here, one of these corners if you wanted to. We're going to have some space up there, so you could tuck it in right there or over here. Okay, our camera's going to be up in front, but we don't really have anything in like this frontal area because the motor wires will come in a little bit behind here on the back. So you could easily stick this right over here if you wanted to, or in the back. Wherever you decide to stick it, you're going to need to run the wires from the receiver to those pads we looked at in the diagram. Those pads are going to be located on this side or this corner edge of the flight controller. So power and ground, TX and RX. Okay. So you could do a little short wiring, just bloop bloop right there. You could run a little bit longer wiring and kind of go under and come back out over here and then get it back to the back if you want to put it on the back. Receivers are often mounted on the back of drones. It's because usually you're flying away from yourself in a lot of scenarios. Okay, so we have better reception that way perhaps. You can mount it over here if you wanted to run it over to the other side for some reason. Those are all decent options, I think. And so you want to do the wiring that way for your receiver to all-in-one board wiring. If your receiver comes with wires, you can definitely use those. Okay, I got a little bit here. If you need more wire, then of course grab some out of the lab. Okay, we'll put that back. Next up after our receiver, we'll kind of go in order around this little diagram here. So we've done our receiver. We're not going to do a GPS this semester or LED strip. You can definitely add those on your own if you want. I'm happy to help you do that. But we are going to have a camera. This is the back of the camera right here. And so the camera, I don't have one that's open right now, so I'm just going to show you with the diagram. But we will take a look at that. This blue wire here is not one we use or really set up in class. You're welcome to check that out if you want to. It's just a camera control pad. But these three on the right-hand side are going to be used. We have power, ground, and video. Okay, a video signal. And it says ED and then the video. And these are on the other side of the board from where the receiver attaches over here. Okay, so it says E and D, and then our yellow is video, and those go over here to E and D, and the video comes in right there, or sorry, cam, I guess it's the cam pad where the camera attaches right there. So that'll be relatively easy on our physical flight controller. Okay, our camera will be mounted up here in the front. Okay, and we'll have the three wires going back to our, let's see, I get this right, it's E and D, and then our cam pad is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 over here. That's the right one. So I have those three wires soldered to there. And on the camera side, you can kind of see here, there's actually a plug. So we just plug it on the camera side. So just make the wires long enough that you can install the camera and run the wires back from the camera to the all-in-one board. Okay. All right. Hi everybody, this is Duke from the future with a video addition to our video for the FPV class build. I need to update the video as we have a different VTX and different, we're adding a GPS this semester, which was not in the original video. And so I'm just kind of sticking this in the middle of this video, trying to make the edit a little bit smooth, but you know, basically trying to get the facts across here. So in the other video, I was about to show you the video transmitter. That's what I'm going to show you here. Unfortunately, I don't have a mock-up of this entire system physically with me. I do have the video transmitter, but I don't have the flight controller and stuff already mounted onto a frame and everything, because I don't have any more of these flight controllers this semester. A little bit more scarce this semester than they have been in the past, and you're all using all of them in class, which is good. But I'm going to use the RTL draw page here to walk you through some of the wiring and then show you the physical video transmitter in correlation with the wiring here. So the other half, like I mentioned in the video, the other half of the video transmitter system, so we have the camera over here going into the flight controller, and from the flight controller goes out to the video transmitter in this case. And here's our video transmitter. This is a Rush Tank Race 2. And I have a picture of the front of it here, which we'll talk about in a second. But basically there are 5 possible pads on the back of this video transmitter for you to solder wires to. And we're going to use 4 of those pads. And you can see here they're attached to the flight controller with the corresponding colors. So we have 5 volt here in red going to 5 volt. Ground is in white going to ground. We have the video in yellow orangish color going to the VTX pad. And data going to T1. And if you reference the actual speed-to-beat diagram over here, it's very similar. We have 5 volt ground video going to the 5 volt pad, the ground pad, and yellow is video going to the VTX pad. And over here it says IRC, which is the IRC tramp. That's the protocol that this video transmitter uses. Ours uses smart audio, if I remember right, but it doesn't really matter either way. The blue wire here is going to go into the T1 pad, just like our data wire in green here is going to the T1 pad. All that is a wire that allows the flight controller to talk to the video transmitter and tell it to change channels and change power levels and stuff like that. So we need it attached to a T1, a transmit pin, to go to the data pad here. We don't use the ground pad on the video transmitter for anything, so that's just left unoccupied. Okay. with our video transmitter. The other portion of this, I guess, so from camera captures the video, feeds it through the flight controller, which overlays the on-screen display, and that video with the on-screen display is then sent to the video transmitter via this video wire here. After that, where does it go though is out the antenna basically. And so the other side of the video transmitter, which is pictured here, this is the same thing as this, just the front and back. There's this connector here on the top left-hand corner. It's like a little circle with a pin in the middle, kind of. That's called a UFL, or sometimes called an IPEX connector, depends on what it's used for, what size it is, and that kind of stuff. Oftentimes in FPV, you'll see it call it a UFL connector, though. And up here at the top, I have a just an image I found online of an antenna with a UFL connector. So a video transmitter antenna. This is a right-hand circular polarized antenna. And we have a UFL connector on there. And so if you look at the connector, it's got kind of this outer ring here, and then the inner receptacle for the pin. So the outer ring is one contact, and the inner receptacle is the other contact. If you look here, we have the outer ring and then the inner pin. So you can kind of imagine this is going to snap right on top of this one here, kind of a click. I'll show you in the dot cam in a second. You need to be fairly careful with these connectors. They are more fragile than other things we deal with, and so it's pretty easy to break this crimp right here or bust the connector or things like that. So I'll show you in the dot cam in just a second how that works live. But there's our video transmitter antenna, and it's going to send the signals out through to our FPV goggles so we can see the video feed. So let's switch over for a second to, where is OBS? There, OBS. Switch over to our dot cam, and we'll zoom in a little bit here. Okay, so we have our video transmitter antenna. This is the 3D printed mount we're going to be using, and then we have our video transmitter itself. So let me widen this a little bit. Our video transmitter, just like you saw in the image, has the 5 pads on the back, and if we were to zoom back in, we would see the labels more or less. A little hard to see in the dot cam, but each of these pads has a different label: 5-volt ground, video, data, and ground. So those are our 5 solder pads. You can solder to the flat portion here, or you can solder to the castellated holes here. I'd recommend doing the flat pads since there's no reason to do the castellated pads in how we're setting this up. This will be, at some point, attached to the bottom side of our top plate. So our top plate of our quad looks like this. It's going to be attached, I know where the sticky stuff is right here, basically, like so, or like so, orientation wise. It'll be stuck there, and so in my opinion it works best to have the wires coming out flat from the VTX, not at a 90-degree angle like the castellated holes would have you do. Now speaking of that, when we orient this inside of our quad, here's just an example antenna. This is not the same antenna you might have, but it has a UFL connector. And you can kind of see that, and that's going to clip on right here onto the VTX. Okay, don't necessarily clip it on right this second, but just be aware that's where it goes. Okay, so if we think about this, the antenna is going to likely have to come off the back or the side like this, because this little rim here, this metal plate, is going to block it from really coming off this way or this way. It needs to seat down fully, and to do that it's going to have to come off over here to over here. You have about a 90-degree rotation of where it can come off. So if we're going to be having this come off and having these wires come off, it would be advantageous to make the wires long enough and run the wires in the same direction or completely the opposite direction as the antenna. So we don't want the wires coming out like the side or this side. We want the front or the back, and that's because that way we can put a piece of heat shrink over this entire thing before we attach it to the carbon fiber. Okay. So it's up to you if you want to have them come off the front or the back. If you have them come off the front, right, you're going to need to attach the heat shrink before you put the antenna on, because you can't put the heat shrink probably, well, maybe you could. Maybe you could fit the heat shrink over the antenna and over the VTX. But if you think about this, you have wires coming out one side and the antenna coming out the other side. You got to put the heat shrink over before one of those two things goes on. If you put the wires coming out the same side as the antenna, roughly like so, once you're finished, you can just slide the heat shrink over the entire thing from one direction. But your wires will probably have to be a little bit longer to reach kind of that extra loop from the video transmitter all the way over to the flight controller. So up to you on how you want to do that. but I would advise you to have that come off, the wires come off either the front or the back, not like out the side kind of or anything like that. Okay. The way this connector works, see if I can kind of show you this on camera. And of course, I'm happy to help you with this in class. But you have this little UFL connector here. Okay. You can see it matches up. It's got the circle and the inner pin. When you're putting these on, you want to get it straight over the connector and then just push straight, push straight in and it will click on. I'm not going to do it right now because I don't want to have to take this off and possibly damage something, but the less cycles of on and off, the better. The tighter the connection will be, unless it'll pop off on accident. Basically going to get it lined up straight, push it straight on. If you have the connector on, you need to take it off for some reason. You're going to have the connector, installed, and then you want to basically try to get your fingernails around the edges of it so you can pull straight off. You don't want to like twist it or yank it or something. You just want to pop straight off with the connection in order to not damage anything. And make sure not to yank on the wire. Always try to grab the connector like with your fingernails or something like that. The crimp is fairly fragile and also very small, so it's easy to break this portion here. That's happened to a lot of people in the past. So there's our VTX, and this antenna here will get placed into the 3D printed mount here. This one's a little bit rough around the edges, trying to get the TPU settings right. But the antenna will go down through here, or through this cavity here, and you kind of come from one side or the other, doesn't really matter. Okay. All you want to do is press this in and stretch the TPU over the antenna. It should have a nice snug fit, like that. And this end will come out down here. And you can kind of see on this aircraft, sort of. Let's see. Here's the teal antenna here. This thicker black cable, a little bit hard to see with contrast there. One right above my finger is coming down and out. It's going over to this. This is the VTX on this aircraft, but either way, you kind of see that thicker black one right there where my finger's at. It's going to come down and out. You can kind of see it coming down here through the back a little bit, down around, and then through to the VTX. So on our aircraft, this would be the back of the aircraft, going to come down, around, and then hook into the VTX inside the aircraft. And that's why you want to figure out how long your wires have to be for this to make sure they can reach the flight controller, because this is a fixed length. We can't really make this longer very easily. But the wires here, you can use these, or you can just get some wires from the lab that are longer, plenty of length to reach from your flight controller to the video transmitter with the wires. Okay. I hope that helps with the video transmitter setup there. And that completes our video system. So from the camera to the flight controller to the VTX to the antenna to our goggles. Okay, let's go back over here for a moment. So we have that explained there. It keeps making these little hand icons. I don't know where those come from. Interesting, but all right. The last thing I need to explain in this kind of interruption from the future is our GPS. We have not done this in the class in the past, so it's not in the older video. But essentially, you're going to follow the wiring diagram you made, which is part of the reason why you made it, and wire up the GPS to the flight controller. Just remember, whenever you're using what's called a UART, a TX and RX pair, in this case, they need to be swapped. So we have our TX in orange here going to R6. We have our RX in blue going to T6, and they need to be the same set. So these are both 6. That's the same set. We have our ground here in white going over to ground. 5 volt goes to 4V5, and that might seem kind of confusing because there's a 5 volt pad right over here. The difference is 4V5 pads will be powered up on USB power only, so they're actually more like, I think, 4.8 volts or something like that. And 5 volt pads are only powered up when you plug in the main battery that you're going to fly with. The advantage to this is that our GPS can be powered up with just USB power, and so we can maybe use a USB power bank or something and let it sit there and get a GPS fix while we're configuring things, or plugged into the computer while we're configuring things. But our video transmitter is on 5 volts, and video transmitters overheat quite easily, and so it's good to not have the video transmitter powered up while we're messing around with the configuration or waiting for a satellite fix for the GPS. We only have this powered up once we plug in the actual flight battery. So that's a good way to do it, to have the VTX on 5 volts and the GPS and our receiver actually as well on 4v5. Okay, you can see the 4v5 up here for our receiver. Same idea there. It can power up with just computer power, so we can set up our transmitter, configure our flight modes, and all that good stuff. But continuing on, we have 4v5, and then we have SCL, and here in purple going to the CL pad, and SDA going to the DA pad. So that's our GPS setup there in terms of wiring. If we go over to the dot cam, let's see, there we go. Let's swap this out for our GPS. You should have a GPS looks like this. It's a walk snail GPS. It comes with this little harness here, which is kind of nice. A little bit. You can see on the back of the walk snail GPS, we have those labels, TX, RX. I can read that. Ground, 5 volt, SCL, and SDA. And so as we look at those labels there, we go, okay, well, this is the order. And it comes with this nice harness. Okay. And you're going to plug one of these ends into the GPS. So let's take a look here. Typically red and black are power and ground, kind of standardized there. So if red is the fourth wire here from the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, we could give a good guess that we plug it in this direction, but we're going to check the pins. And so we can see here, if you can see, the pins are on the top side of the connector. So they're kind of more up where the screwdriver's at on that side rather than down by the board. And in here, the pin receptacles are on the top side, well, the bottom in the photograph, but on the bottom side here of this. So if we plug this in, they're going to match up. Okay, now they're both on the top. So we're going to plug it in like this, and we're going to make sure it's nice and seated. You can use your fingernails to kind of press it in there, make sure it's seated well. Okay, and there's your GPS plugged in. Now, I should have shown you in a different order because you don't necessarily need to plug it in before you install it into the 3D printed mount. However, for continuation here, we have it plugged in, and then the other end here, we will snip off, and we will direct solder these wires to the flight controller like we showed you in the diagram on those different spots in the TL draw diagram. So you can just cut this end off, cut it at an appropriate length for where it's mounted on your aircraft. If we look at roughly where it's mounted on the aircraft, and this is not the same flight controller as you guys have, but we'll say the GPS mount's going to be up here, and the wires need to come in, come in, down and around, and they're going to be going down to the flight controller, so, roughly somewhere in here-ish. I would definitely measure this more carefully than I am on camera right now, but make sure you have a good length with enough slack to go down into the flight controller. Additionally, I'd highly recommend you take the wires and you twist them into kind of a bundle, because they're going to be coming from outside the drone to inside the drone, and there is some portion of that that will be kind of exposed. If they're twisted like this, there's less chance of them kind of just splaying apart like this, okay, and then getting chopped up by your propeller. So they're twisted to kind of stay in a bundle, and we can route that bundle, down and around and into the drone, and it will stay nice and tight and snug and not be able to kind of flip out and get caught in the prop as easily. So recommend twisting this before you measure, because the measurement will change once you twist the wires. Okay. So let's zoom back out. So let's say you already plugged it in like I did in the video. Silly me, I should have done this in a different order, but you want to get the connector out. Again, use your fingernails and kind of just side to side a little bit, and it will start to come out, and then pull. Now I'm not pulling on the wires, I'm just pulling on the connector. Okay. So real order of operations here would be to get your 3D printed mount. Okay. Take your GPS compass combo here and install it into the mount. So you're going to slip it in there, slide it in there. I'm not going to slide mine all the way in because, like I said, these are kind of hard to get out. You slide it all the way in so the connector is facing the back there. You can kind of see the connector starting to come out. Okay. Once it's installed into the mount, then you go ahead and plug this in the right orientation. And you would then install this on your top plate, twist the wires, take the measurement, and that would be your setup for your GPS. Okay. Hope that makes sense. I apologize for doing it out of order. Got too excited, I guess. That is your GPS with this associated wire and harness. And if you see stuff about compass as well, or a magnetometer, this is a GPS and a compass, or GPS and a magnetometer. That's what we're using here on our build. We're not going to really use the compass or magnetometer with our software, but it's there, and perhaps in the future it'll be something you want to turn on or enable more to use more in your flying or your setup of your quadcopter. All right, that should take care of Duke from the future, and I hope the rest of this video helps you out getting your quad built. Thanks. And for propellers, I wanted to talk to you about that for a second. These motors are called T-mount motors. They do not have a threaded shaft. They just have a smooth motor shaft. Okay, that sticks up there. And our props are designed for those by having these 3 holes. So the center hole is where the shaft goes, and the 2 outer holes are where you put some screws to hold the prop onto the motor. So we have 4 different holes here in the motor. It doesn't really matter. They have 4 of them, so it's easier to line it up, I guess. So we'll put the prop on and try to line up with the holes to make our job a little bit easier. Okay, just like that. Press it all the way down. It should be about flush. And then we bring back our 5 different bags of screws from our motor. Okay, these are the 5 bags of screws that came with each motor. And remember, we use the second to smallest ones to attach the motor to the arm. Okay, now we can pick the middle bag, or middle in size. Okay, or this is the same size as these ones. These are the same size screws. There's different colors. So basically, either of these 2 can be used to attach the props to the motor. Okay, and I think it's just an aesthetic thing, I guess, if you want to pick the silver ones or the black ones. Again, the way I figured out which ones would work best was I took the screw itself, put it on the screwdriver, and put it like this, and said, okay, coming down from the top of the prop here, should that focus, come on. And if they come down from the top of the prop, it should go through the entire prop and go into the motor a little bit, but not too far. And this is a great length. Okay, I think these are M2 by 8s, I think. Anyways, you get that lined up with the hole in the motor. You just screw it in. No, it's not lined up yet. There we go, maybe right there. Feel around for the screw holes a little bit sometimes, get it aligned. There we go. Okay, nice and snug. Goes in just like that, and you put the other screw in there, of course, and do that the same thing for all 4 motors. Okay. This is the one area where you don't use Loctite. If you use Loctite on prop screws or prop nuts, the Loctite will eat away at the plastic the props are made out of and cause the props to basically disintegrate over time. So we don't use Loctite on these. We just check these screws for our pre-flight and things like that. Make sure they're tight and ready to go so they don't come off when we're flying, of course. And that's how you install your propellers. Okay. So that should take care of the physical assembly of your aircraft. And you don't need to put the propellers on until you're all the way ready to fly. I just wanted to show you how in this video. You'll need to do some software configuration, make sure the propellers are going the right direction and stuff way before you ever put them on. So don't worry about that yet, but now you know how to put them on. The rest of the assembly should be covered in Ryan's frame assembly video, so you kind of go back and forth between his video and my video a little bit, I guess. But that should be fine, and that will give you your FPV drone. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and ask. Of course, I may have missed something in here or may have misspoke. I hope I didn't, but I think we got everything covered. Let me know if you have any questions, and happy building.